All right. So there has not been any change with the mainnet and testnet nodes. Just one comment I would make regarding the mainnet. I explained last time that we have consolidated the machines into fewer machines with like about 5 nodes per machine. One issue that we have been seeing is that there's a slow daily degradation in the deploys per day. On the mainnet, we're investigating that issue. We'll report on that as we discover more as to what's happening there. But as far as the code base, we're making very good progress on block merge. In a few days, we should be able to have the first PR coming in. Basically, where the team is, all of them are focused on block merge at different levels of it. Basically, Will and NutZipper are focusing on getting out the initial release. And Tomislav is helping them, but also thinking about the next few small releases of block merge that should be coming out and how to structure the code for that. That's kind of what the team is doing. NutZipper has completed the conflict resolution code. He is now in the process of, the team did the initial review of his code and any logical issues that are discovered in there, as well as bugs they discovered elsewhere in the code or the tests that are failing. Those are the things that the team is addressing right now. That's why we have reasonable confidence that within a matter of a few days, we should be able to get the initial release of the block merge out. And of course, there'll be much more work on that. After that, like I said, there are multiple levels of the block merge. For example, the initial version would not cover the join cases, and that's something we'll deal with in a separate release later on. I mean, at least a separate PR. Whether how we structure the releases is a slightly different matter, but the first PR would not have the joins in there. Basically, joins will be anytime they encounter a join, they'll treat it as a conflict. But that's the piece that Tomislav is kind of planning and working on to say how to handle that. So there are other issues that need to be tackled for block merge. You know, some of them are bugs from the previous code that we knew we needed to tackle, but they now become important for the block merge. So I'll just briefly show you what that list looks like. So this is the list here. Let me increase the. So there are about 8 open issues, as you can see. There may be more added to it as we go through the testing and discover anything else that is not working quite as anticipated. Because basically what the interaction with these things is that so far, most of the testing was done in a chain type of a scenario as opposed to a DAG type of a scenario. With the block merge, we're really dealing with a DAG situation, and we need to make sure that everything that was, whether it's Casper or RSpace or anything else, that it's working as intended. So that's the work that needs to be done, that the team is working on. So that's where we are relative to block merge. There will be, multiple small releases as we make progress. We continue to work on the dependencies. There were a few more dependencies committed in the last week. There are more, the KMON and the monitoring related dependencies, still a PR that's being reviewed and debugged. And then there'll be more dependencies coming in, essentially to prepare the code base for Scala 2.13 And once we're at Scala 2.13, the migration to Scala 3.0 will be easier, but we're not right now going to worry about 3.0 at the moment. We first want to get to 2.13 eventually, and then stabilize the code base over there for a few months before we go to Scala 3.0. But when we do go to Scala 3.0, there are some nice new features we could use. There are more reflection. There's more reflection in Scala 3.0 and other features. So that's kind of what we are moving towards. I don't think there is much more to report on Rolang 1.1 or anything else. I hope people are continuing to use that. But at the moment, we're fully focused on block merge, and we're not doing anything new and additional there. And I think that's mostly all I wanted to say as far as tech update is concerned for today. Are there any questions, comments from anybody on anything else I said so far? All right, over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Raul. I appreciate that. I did want to mention that the numbers that we're getting on the conflict resolution algorithm are very encouraging. It's quite fast. So that's super encouraging. Now, counterbalancing that, the actual, once we've detected the conflict, we still have to actually merge the blocks, and right now that's what's taking the most time. So we've done an initial analysis, and it looks like it looks like most of the time is in the encode decode cycle for retrieving the data out of store. So if we cache that data rather than having to go to the encode decode cycle, then we should be able to shorten that time considerably. So we're in good stead that way. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. We should talk about some more technical items, but I did want to go ahead and get the community and review segment in now, if that's okay. Is Daryl around?
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. Why don't you give that?
Okay. Hey everybody. So here's the community week in review for January 7th to the 13th. Last Thursday in the governance committee, we discussed the governance committee's position in advising the role that Mark Puey could potentially take towards help with business affairs. On Friday at the climate and coordination call, we discussed a skin disease in dolphins, the fiscal cost of climate disasters in 2020, and Raphael led us in a discussion on RChain's concurrency with Greg. On Monday, the Casper stand-up call. This week's Casper stand-up covered a modular approach to proving our version of CBC Casper correct. And also on Monday at the RDev member co-op planning call, they discussed insurance DAP and creating liquid democracy development training video. Yesterday in the communications working group, we discussed a roadmap document that Steve prepared for the website and Wikipedia entries for Greg and RChain. At the DAP developer working group, they recorded a video adding ballot creation action to liquid democracy. And this morning at the active member hangout, Steve Ross Talbot talked about opportunities in the COVID-19 passport. And I dredged up an old document from the RChain archives of a comparison chart between us and other blockchain initiatives. And I kind of threw out the challenge for some people to kind of help fill it out a little bit more. And that is it.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any questions for Daryl? Okay. Well, I want to be cautious, but I have to say I'm feeling very excited about the recent work on Casper, because for the first time we have a spec of the bulk of the feature that fits on a single page, and that's kind of and the nature of the correctness proof using this approach is quite modular, and it allows us to do the bulk of it equationally, which is really nice. It's something that I've been hoping for. If you look at the safety proofs, for example, that Vlad did, they are a lot of English argumentation rather than pushing equations, and it really it's much more likely that we can automate the proofs if the proofs are of an equational nature. So that's very exciting from my perspective. Any questions on that? We are holding a workshop with the European process algebra community, 2 workshops, one on the 4th of February and one on the 11th of February. If all the organization stuff has gone according to plan. And so we'll be talking about that new approach to Casper, amongst other things, in the workshop. So hopefully we'll get some feedback from that community. I'm very excited about it. I think it'll be a lot of fun to let them see just how practical and pragmatic a lot of this stuff that they work on actually turns out to be. That'll be a lot of fun. The board discussion was largely we did not take any votes, so there's nothing to update there. It was largely just information exchange. There is update on the member sale, so please come if you are interested in that update. Please pop in on the Friday session so we can update you on that. That's very good news there. Trying to think, what else did we wanted to mention? We talked about it yesterday. What else do we want to mention?
You had some ideas about Daasl, but I'm not sure if it was for this meeting.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Thank you for reminding me. I knew there was a big ticket item that I thought might be fun to talk about.
Yeah, different kind of post verification or different level of validation for ad content.
For the sponsored content.
Yeah, so there's two features that we need to look at carefully. One of them is relatively straightforward, and I don't think there's a lot of controversy around it, and it doesn't really require a lot of rocket science to sort it out. But it is something. It is a feature that we haven't mentioned before that we do need to offer. So unlike YouTube, where the content that is put up by users can be directly taken down by YouTube if the content is flagged as violating copyright law or violating community standards. Daasl is one step removed, right? So Daasl is providing a layer that sits underneath all of the dApps, right? So if someone made an R Twitter or an R YouTube, they could use Daasl to provide monetization for the content that was associated with that particular dApp. But so they might be in charge of taking down questionable content, but there are questions about liability with respect to the network that we have to take a look at. And so one of the things that we know that we can do, if you think about it, if there is a content that is getting a lot of attention in a given DApp, so for example, a post that's getting thousands and thousands of likes, or a video or audio data that's having millions of views or listens, then obviously folks who are advertisers and sponsors who are trying to promote sponsored content, they're going to want to target that kind of content. And so if like in the case of YouTube, content can be demonetized immediately if it violates certain standards. So that's something that Daasl can offer as a feature, is the demonetization of content that is being potentially the target of sponsored content, ads and the like. So we need to make sure that amongst the APIs that Daasl offers is the ability to demonetize content. So that's something that we hadn't articulated in our APIs, but it's obviously something that we need to be able to do. That's just a natural and obvious refinement that I think is reasonable. But I did want to sort of air it here. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that?
The interesting part is looking at who has the power or authority to demonetize the content, and so how that can be done in a fair and decentralized way using a validator set. Yeah, well, I haven't gotten to that yet. I'm just talking about the API for demonetizing content. But you're right. It's a good. It's foreshadowing the next idea. Obviously, in the case of the 2016 election, what we saw was that a number of sponsored content, a wide range of sponsored content was pushed by Russian agents, which had a good deal of impact on voter response. And so sponsored content, in the same way that content needs to be dealt with, sponsored content needs to be dealt with as well. And one thing that it needs to be regulated. And so of course there's an issue around censorship. However, there is an approach that we might take that happens on a per shard basis. So the idea is to, so if you remember with Casper does not look into the content of transactions. So if someone is deploying a storage element from Erlang to the network, they can store some content, but Casper and Erlang execution doesn't look at the data blob in terms of validation. It's just making sure that all the transactional integrity is maintained, but it doesn't look inside the content. With the Daasl APIs, we can potentially offer the ability, since it's kind of a level up, we can offer the ability to look inside the content, and we would offer that to validators who are validating content.
But you're saying
and
the sponsored content,
the sponsored content.
Yeah.
We're not talking about end user content. Both of them have to be dealt with, but with Daasl we don't have the we're not making the calls on the DApp side of the data. We're only making the calls on the sponsored content side. So we're the ones that have the ability to validate those transactions or get in the way of those transactions. We being Daasl. So just on the sponsored content side, you could imagine sort of iterating Casper one level up, and their validators would be able to peek inside sponsored content, but their validation methods, whether they do them by hand or by algorithm, the main thing is that they have to keep up. So if they, just like with Casper, if they fall behind in processing transactions, so validating content, they'll be booted out. Just like in Casper, if a validator falls behind, they get ejected from the network. They're not slashed, but they're also not getting any sort of validation rewards. So I imagine that most validators that are gonna work at that level would implement some kind of AI to do content validation.
like GP3 or TensorFlow.
GPT-3, yes, something, yeah, using those kinds of technologies. YouTube, for example, is quite good at ferreting out unfair use, and they do that algorithmically. So there are algorithms out there for doing some of this kind of work. The other piece of this is that validators who are sort of validating content would be staked. And so there would be a whole set of slashing conditions if they are engaged in censorship on the one hand, or if they let content that doesn't adhere to the community standards associated with the shard, if they let that go through. So for example, a validator that lets content go through that is in clear copyright violation, that can be a slashing offense. Or a validator that lets content go through that turns out to be illegal, such as child pornography. That would also be a slashing offense. So the thought is to basically just borrow the whole Casper infrastructure, but one level up for the validation of content as opposed to the validation of transactions. And what that does is it provides a level of utility for the Daasl token that we haven't contemplated yet, right? So it makes the Daasl token tied directly to the content integrity / security of the shard and all the dApps that are using the shard. So I've been speaking at length here. Does that make sense to folks? People understand what we're saying?
Yep.
Cool. Any thoughts?
Well, I had another question. I had one question, but then you answered it, and I have a second question.
Okay.
Do you feel like it's fair to make validators have to, like, I don't want to say police content, but like to make sure that the content that is being validated is legitimate? I mean, that seems like a lot of work for somebody who's validating already. You know what I mean?
Well, the thing is, I want to make a distinction. So we're not talking about reusing validators that are doing Casper to do the content stuff. So those would be two separate groups.
Oh, I see. It'd be different people.
Well, different programs.
Right.
Yes, they would be different programs. And if it's not your bailiwick, don't sign up to be a validator for that shard. Basically, if if the community standards for that shard are not something you support, then don't validate for that shard. And
Right.
that way you can have diversity, right? You can have, shards that allow certain content that other shards would not. I don't think we can ever, solve the problem, of what's universally allowed content and what isn't. But there are clear community standards that are related to a given jurisdiction, right? So there's some form of copyright law that's active in almost every jurisdiction. And so being able to, the extent to which that can be, dealt with in as automated a fashion as possible would be to everyone's advantage. It would provide effectively more security at the content layer for the network.
Yeah, I mean, we could also think of, we currently are thinking of content curators at the DApp level and how they're going to be, compensated by the DApp. And they'll get a piece of the sponsored ads revenue or something, but there could be another level of curating these sponsored ads themselves or complaining about them or whatever. And then there could be some algorithms working in conjunction with that to help these additional level of validators. So,
Yeah,
for example,
yeah.
right? I mean, if the same sponsored content provider, for example, is being serviced by 100 dApps, and if people in those 100 dApps deliver a degree of either review or positive or negative, and then the validator of the content integrity validator can then have some algorithms to say, how do we use that to do validation at that level? So.
Yeah, and I mean, if we do get one of the nice things about this is if we are able to right now, this is just kind of pie in the sky thinking, right? I was looking hard at how to provide more security for the content network, and it occurred to me, hey, why not attempt to just reuse the security mechanism that we've got? And that has a lot of advantages, right? We don't have to build a new conceptual apparatus. We can, potentially even reuse code to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean that there aren't, gotchas lurking in this in this architectural approach that we haven't figured out yet. But I do think there's enough, sort of there that it's worth a vigorous discussion and investigation. So that's why I thought, well, here's a community that might might throw some good ideas and some good questions at it. That's kind of why I thought it would be worth bringing up here. It also, I think, if we were able to pull this off, I think it would dramatically increase the value of the Daasl network. And if we are able to do it for the sponsored content, then that means that we now have tools that we could give to the dApp developers to apply to the content side of the network, if that makes sense. You see what I'm saying? So like we would employ these for making sure that the sponsored content is all, copacetic. And if it's working for us, then it could be, a suite of tools that would be available for the dApp developers to make sure that the user content also conform to whatever community standards were in effect for that dApp.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is the kind of more the legal side of things. Like, it's just kind of interesting because, like, if we were to kind of compare what we're doing with, say, YouTube. So YouTube is a platform, and anyone can upload any content to YouTube. And thanks to the 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act, due to the safe harbor provisions provided there, it's not, the onus is not on YouTube to police it. The onus is on the infringee to notify YouTube that they've been infringed, and then YouTube has to take it down. But as I understand it, YouTube already proactively does a lot of that, even though legally I don't think they're obliged to do that. I don't know. Maybe the law has changed since 1998. I'm not sure. But that's just something that I'd find interesting. Is just like, to what degree is the legal onus on the DApp, and to what degree would it be falling onto Daasl? Because I guess if you compare YouTube to Daasl, there's kind of like a second intermediary there that isn't there for YouTube. YouTube does the ads in-house, whereas we're proposing a platform where there's the DApp that utilizes the Daasl ad service. So I'm just kind of
Yeah,
like,
So I want to be clear, right? What I'm talking about is not validating user content, but validating the sponsored content. So we have more of a burden there because we're involved in or Daasl has more of a burden there because Daasl is involved in a transaction, right? It's charging token to put the content up on the network. Right, so there's arguably, because of that transactional nature, Daasl is more responsible for whatever content shows up there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I wonder how the law, like the DMCA and safe harbor provisions, how they would apply.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they apply to advertisements, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar.
It's a different game.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It's similar to basically what are the rules around what Google does or does not advertise, right? I mean, there are things that you can and things that you can't. So it's the same sort of a realm of regulatory realm that we fall into.
Right, and then what I was saying was, if Daasl comes up with a decent solution for making sure that all sponsored content, adheres to community standards. So for example, you can imagine that someone launches an ad campaign, but they don't bother to go and get the rights to the music that they put in their video.
Yeah, that would be a common one, wouldn't it?
So then someone could come along and so our infrastructure could prevent someone coming along and suing Daasl because Daasl actually did a transaction with this group and so they were somehow responsible for putting that content up on the network.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example, right? You could, but also, I think what we're seeing, and I think you've pointed this out yourself, is that modern society is now seeing a wide range of sponsored content that is of a political nature or of a manipulative nature, and and there's a lot of questions around censorship that Facebook and Twitter and others are having to deal with, that this kind of nicely sidesteps. Well, what we say is, well, if you can encode your rules of engagement into this framework, as rules that can be checked in this framework, then there's automated support to make sure that the sponsored content adheres to the community standards. And if there is a community that doesn't like those standards, they are free to set up a different shard and use different rules. You see what I'm saying? We dance on both sides of that issue.
So when you say set up a different shard, it would be like they'd be making their own Daasl kind of thing.
No. It's no. I mean, it's still Daasl. It's just that
right.
you put in different rules for what the validators are checking. So one group of validators are checking. Let me see. What's an example where you can kind of go either way. Let's say there's something that's right on the hairy edge of hate speech, right? So some groups will say that's hate speech, and other groups will say it's not hate speech; it's just free speech. So it's the same Daasl. It's just two different shards running Daasl, but one validator, deems certain content as inadmissible, while that's one validator group, and the other shard, the different validator group, deems that content admissible.
Oh, okay. Huh.
You see, yeah. So we can't come up. I don't think it's possible to come up with some universal set of values or mores
Right.
that all networks are going to buy into. But what we can do is provide a framework in which, if there's the extent to which they can codify, markers for the kinds of things that are admissible and the kinds of things that are not admissible, then we can provide automated support for that. So, and there are clear examples, right? Copyright infringement is clear, and even though that's pretty fancy technology in and of itself, there's been a lot of headway on that. YouTube does a remarkable job of detecting copyright infringement long before the infringee puts up a notice.
But it also can make a lot of mistakes, and I'll give you an example that happened to me. I recorded a piece of music and put it on Facebook, and it got muted because they said I was playing a recording of someone else's, but it was mine.
Just you played it so well.
So well, whatever.
Yeah,
but the algorithm thought that it was another person's recording because it was a piece of music that had been played many times before. But it's like, that is like so ridiculous, No,
I hear you. I'm not saying that the software is perfect. What I'm saying is that there's been a lot of advances, and and there will be more advances. So
I hope so.
Oh yeah, I think almost certainly. And the main thing is, like, if you're having a problem with that shard, then don't go there. Use a different shard. That's the idea, is that it's like this allows for infrastructure that is value neutral. Different communities can readily set up their own shards and enforce their community standards. Cool. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Well, we probably should have done it earlier on in the conversation, but it might be worthwhile just reviewing what Daasl is and what it is in relation to RChain, where RChain is a public blockchain. Anyone can create a dApp, but all of the transactions on the platform, they have to be paid for. The validators, the people who dedicate hardware and bandwidth and compute to run the platform, they need to be paid. What Daasl does is it's it's a product which helps DApp owners pay those transaction fees through sponsored content. So I just wanted to take a crack at describing it.
That was awesome. I think you did a great job. I think you did a really good job. That is that's precisely it, right? If you think about it, if someone comes along and says, "Hey, we think this this iteration of RChain is fast enough to do a chat," all right? So, you know, a variant of Zulip or Signal or whatever, right? So they decide to use RChain as the backend for their chat application. Well, one of the problems, you know, like so, people are very used to using Signal or applications like that for free, right? They don't pay a subscription. But in the case of RChain, every single transaction is going to cost rev. So where is that rev coming from? Well, there are basically two approaches. The dApp developer, so whoever is doing R Signal or R Twitter or whatever the application is, they could charge a subscription fee. So that's one solution. The other solution is that which is what people experience all the time when they're using the existing Twitter or the existing Facebook or the existing Instagram, etc., is that sponsored content sneaks into their feed, right? And that sponsored content is paying for their use of that application. And so Daasl, rather than say, you know, all of, you know, each dApp has to develop their own ad solution, their own sponsored content solution. Daasl provides a uniform set of APIs and other solutions that make it possible for all the dApps that are building on top of RChain to have these have the sponsored content, and it is tokenized. And now what we're talking about is how to extend the utility of that token to address the security of the network in terms of the sponsored content. Any other questions or comments about this?
I have a question about the white paper draft for the Daasl. Who was making like the logo and everything?
So we hired a designer.
I mean, like put it together, like the actual document.
It was a group effort.
Okay, I mean, just to make sure so you're not using any images that you just found on the internet that might infringe the copyright. Just check.
Yeah.
You know, you can just take like stuff from, you know, ArtStation or you know, pages like that and just slap them in, because it doesn't work like that. You probably don't want to get another like copyright infringement, like in a copyright infringement lawsuit unnecessarily.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that would be ironic.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of normal. You can't just use like art that you find any random image on the internet. You have to kind of check that you have the rights to use it.
Yeah. Well, our designer is pretty savvy about that stuff.
Yeah, I like the logo, but it's not the logo. It's like this Intel thing. That I found on DeviantArt. It looks exactly like that. So,
okay, all right, yeah. We'll
I will just remove it.
Cool. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts about anything that we brought up today, or stuff that we haven't covered today? Okay. Well, thanks to all, and I'm sure we will see many of you in the closed door session on Friday. Please stay safe.